All righty. Well, thank you for joining me, Dr. Jones. I'm really, really grateful. I wouldn't have thought you'd said yes, and I appreciate it a lot.
You're
Um,
welcome.
and you know what we're planning to talk to because I pretty much just printed out those exact questions I sent you.
Okay.
And do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm the editor of Culture Wars magazine, author of a number of books. My latest book is Walking with a Bible and a Gun: The Rise, Fall, and Return of American Identity. And it's available at fidelitypress.org.
Wonderful. Well, like I said, I'm really grateful that you agreed to talk to me, and I've been real nervous about it all day, and I was hoping to have time to kind of like get into the mood for it, but I was just buried in children and work and stuff like that. So I'm just jumping
Well,
into it
jump
like you.
into it. Jump into the mood. We're in
Okay.
the mood. We're in the mood right now.
So you told us that your latest book was Walking with a Bible and a Gun, which is about American history. Do you want to just tell us more about that and also just kind of your goals in general and what things look like for you and what you're trying to accomplish? If you have more to say about it.
Yeah, every book is based on the last book, and I suddenly realized that we have an identity crisis right now. Nobody, we're in order to contextualize this, I'm saying that we are at the end of the Third Republic right now. The First Republic began in 1781. Everything
Okay.
lasts 80 years. Nothing lasts more than 80 years, which is the lifespan of a man. So 80 years from 1781 was 1861. The First Republic ended with the Civil War. Certain ideas and concepts did not pass from the First to the Second Republic. One of them was the fact that each state was a kind of independent state in a kind of alliance with other states. After the Civil War, each state was a department of the United States of America, and they lost their sovereignty. Slavery disappeared at this point, bloody battle. And the next republic, the Second Republic, began in 1865 with the end of the Civil War, and that ended in 1945 with the end of World War II. At that point, the ethnic neighborhood disappeared. After World War II, the ethnic neighborhood was basically declared illegal as part of the social engineering that flowed naturally from war and was extended after World War II to destroy local identity and ethnic identity. So
That's
at this point, the people who were Polish who lived in Chicago were driven out of their neighborhoods by black proxy warriors. Same thing in Philadelphia. And when they went to the suburbs, they became white, which is the status that the government wanted to promote after Brown versus School Board, black versus white rather than real ethnicities. So after 1945, as I said, we have the era of social engineering. And that's the Third Republic, and that's coming to an end now. It's now 80 years after that, 2025, 80 years after that. And there are certain things that are not going to pass into the Fourth Republic, like Sears Roebuck. Who thought that Sears Roebuck would ever come to an end? But more importantly, I think the main victim of this transition is going to be Protestantism.
really
Emmanuel Todt wrote a book, a Frenchman, called La Défaite de l'Occident, in which he said that the American empire is failing because its hidden grammar is Protestantism, and Protestantism has evaporated. So once that evaporates, that is, in many ways, the basis of American identity. That's what Samuel Huntington said. He said, an American is an Anglo-Protestant. So now we're going to have a real serious identity crisis because the main source of identity has disappeared, which is basically Protestantism. And I think, I don't know whether you want to talk about this, but I think one of the main manifestations of this right now is Tucker Carlson, a man who calls himself an Episcopalian, but has a kind of ironic attitude toward his own denomination, his own religion. And he's struggling. He's struggling to keep up with the changes that are happening right now, because once the ethnic grammar of America is Protestant, Catholic, Jew. 3
Right.
religions. When Protestantism disappears, you're going to have Catholic and Jew. And that's the battle that's going to inaugurate the Fourth Republic. And Tucker doesn't know where to stand. He can't deal with the issue right now. As you could tell by recent pronouncements at the funeral at Charlie Kirk's memorial service, where he talked about hummus eaters. Can't bring himself to say the word Jew. And that is the most important word right now in America. Everybody knows this. He knows it, but he can't bring himself to say it.
That's really that's really interesting, because I was following you a little bit 5 years ago, and I'm 30 years old now, so any changes that are coming are pretty much coming from my generation, and the one immediately after me. And I was having an identity crisis when I first followed you, and and I never really listened to you for hours and hours or anything like that, but just a few things you said about being white and not being white basically made me really think about, because I grew up in the suburbs. My mother was Swedish and atheist, and ethnically, she was American, and my dad was Irish and Catholic, and I was the only son that wasn't baptized. So, so it was kind of
why is that? Why were you the only one?
Well, it had to do with where they were living. They were living in Los Angeles when they first got together, and I'm the youngest of 5. And by the time, which is a Catholic sort of area, and so it was more cultural. And my dad's very deeply thoughtful about spiritual things. I spent a lot of time thinking about what has happened to him religiously and really like delving into it. But I think he thinks that spiritual things are more abstract, like he likes Taoism and that kind of thing. And by the time I was born, they had moved to New England. And so there just wasn't that reason to baptize, from what I can tell.
Okay.
And so when I was following you, I was more like Calvinistic, and I had converted to that. And then shortly after, I got married, and then I became Catholic from a pretty drastic change, and then I started having children, so I kind of fell off the public. I stopped paying attention.
Why Calvinism? Why did you become a Calvinist?
I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and not in Seattle. I grew up in Everett. So, like I said, I grew up in the suburbs, and out there, the standard is non-denominational. People just don't really talk about anything too deep theologically, but my family was very intellectual, and I love history. And in fact, one of my biggest hangups with Catholicism was the history of Catholicism in America, at least. And I figured that out. But basically, when I left my father's house, I had to make it on my own, and I realized some pretty painful realities about life. And I read the Bible straight through, and by the time I had gotten to the New Testament, because I was kind of nervous to read about Jesus, because that was hard for me at the time, I had been introduced to some preachers, particularly Alistair Begg in Cleveland, and some of the things he said jive with me. And so, but I remember I always had this internal conflict, especially with salvation by grace and that kind of thing, where it just didn't make any sense to me. And I had to battle it and kind of hold on to my faith, as they called it. And when I became Catholic, I was very terrified. When I was looking into it first, I was very terrified between being an idolater on one side or being, in schism from the true church on the other side. Because I had read the Bible, and there were so many things that I was like, what in the world is he talking about with the bread and whatnot? But anyways, not to talk too much. I'm just hoping to make you a little.
Yeah.
But you were very helpful to me. That's all I'm trying to say.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. How old's your mother?
She's in her late 60s now, I think.
60s. So, was she born in Sweden?
No. I said that just because of the context. No, her side of the family came here in like the 1600s.
Oh, okay.
And they'd been in Massachusetts forever. And
were they Lutherans, or did they become Congregationalists?
I honestly have no idea. Part of my parents got divorced, and so um, I have all these cousins and all this extended family, and we moved to the West Coast, and I've just not been in touch with them. And I haven't really been able to establish ties with them, and it's actually a big problem now because we have 3 children. Our oldest is 4, and she's kind of difficult. And nobody taught me how to be married. Nobody taught me how to have children. I knew I wanted to do it, but
It's always on the job training. There's no way to get around it. And I guess the only thing you can go on is your parents and what you call them up when there's some type of crisis and see what they say.
right. Well, what I found out is most of my friends now, once they have 1, 2, or 3 children, at some point they hit a point where they just stop trying to go off on their own and they go and live near their parents. And that's an option I don't have.
Yeah,
because of the breakdown community.
I've been meditating on my own personal history. I was born 4 months after the Kinsey report came out.
Yeah, you were saying that.
And so
I just listened to your interview, one of your interviews.
This is the bad sign I was born under, and that's kind of abstract, but it became very personal because Kinsey, the only reason he could claim legitimacy was because he claimed to be a scientist. So he was an expert on gall wasp, which somehow made him an expert on human sexuality. I never figured that one out either. But science was the legitimator of everything at that point.
Yeah.
If you talk about the early 50s. And so the real intrusion, the real deep emotional intrusion into my life via science was John B. Watson, who wrote a book on child rearing. John B. Watson was the father of behaviorism. He was a Southern boy. Southern boy, grew up on a farm. He loved animals. He just loved being around animals because he was a farm boy, and basically assumed that human beings were just like animals on the farm, and they're not. They're completely different operating system. And so he basically understood that if you feed the chickens at a certain time of day, they're all going to come back at that time of day. They have memory, and you can program their habits. You can work with their instincts and program them. And he thought he thought you could do that with human beings. Mike, can you turn this down a little bit?
Yeah.
He thought you could do that with human beings, and you can't. But what he did, he reinvented himself as a expert on child rearing, with completely bizarre practices. Like he thought that women should not have contact with their children. It would turn children into weaklings or something like that. So the women kept complaining and saying, well, I really want to check in on. So he said, well, if you're really interested in whether your sleeping baby is okay, buy a periscope and look over the edge of the crib with your periscope so your child can't see you.
Wow.
So this is how anybody could get away with it is beyond me. But the real serious damage that he did was with breastfeeding. He said breastfeeding is not scientific because you don't know how much milk the baby's getting. Well, who cares how much it was? So you can't measure it in milliliters. Who cares? The baby eats until he's full, and that's it. And then he stops eating. So this so-called science intruded there. And so my mother, doctor told my mother she should bottle feed. So she took drugs that dried up her milk, which was really weird and dangerous. And then she started messing with formula, which was cost money and was really a big deal back then, where you had to boil water and all this other type of stuff. And my grandmother told her she was crazy for doing this. But this was a serious disruption of my life and the lives, I would say, of my generation, the baby boomer generation, all because of this weird understanding of science, that somehow science has authority over your parents, or somehow that you can allow this to disrupt the bond between mother and child. by
Right.
getting rid of breastfeeding. This is a story, kind of the untold story of my generation.
Yeah. Well, one of the problems is we're raised by your generation, and all of my generation is just confused. It's like you could figure out something's wrong, like we did breastfeeding and home birth and that kind of thing, but it doesn't eradicate all. Like my wife is just so anxious about every little thing because, and I've tried to get her to calm down, but it's hard when you're a man. But it's like you go to the midwife or something, and they're all into like very strange kind of like um modern, what do you want to call it, new age stuff, and they're all basically hippies. And then but they still use these arbitrary measurements from the government. They're like, well, if it's 10.0, I remember the blood sugar was a big one, but I can't remember the numbers. It's like 10.0, you're fine, everyone's calm, but 9.9, it's the end of the world. Now you gotta get a major surgery or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's just been
Well,
a heck of a time.
the baby boomer generation, or the hippies, I was one of them in the 60s.
My dad too.
They reacted against the whole social engineering thing in an inchoate way. They didn't understand exactly what was the magnitude of what was going on. No one had done the research. I did a lot of the research. My book, Slaughter of Cities, is the first book to use the word ethnic cleansing when it comes to something like urban renewal. That was scientific, and I'm saying no, it was ethnic cleansing to drive the Catholics out of the city. So there was a kind of inchoate reaction that the baby boomers knew that something was wrong, but they couldn't identify it because, in a sense, how are you supposed to identify it when you're 17 years old, when you start to realize there's something wrong? So it focused on things like the draft, the war in Vietnam, and of course that got manipulated, and it got manipulated by the Jews. And so the classic example in my life was Earth Day, 1970 in Philadelphia, and 70,000 hippies show up. I was married at this point, and I got problems. I got transportation problems. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I got serious transportation problems. I live in Philadelphia. I don't want to own a car. It's too expensive. There's public transportation. How do I get around? And I decided bicycle. And a lot of my generation bought bicycles. And the problem was they bought the Schwinn Varsity, which is a 42-pound racing bike, which is a contradiction in terms. And it was so ugly and so heavy and so uncomfortable. They rode it once and never rode it again. So it spent the next 30 years in the garage. I bought a Peugeot, which is a much better bicycle, lighter and so on and so forth. And then we got rid of the car. And this was a big break. And it was a real form of liberation for me, because I could use transportation to get in shape.
Yeah.
Rather than two separate things. I saved a lot of money. And it was so we go to Earth Day, which is when the question's on my mind. And this Jew, Ira Einhorn, shows up. Nobody knew who Ira Einhorn was. Completely unknown guy until he shows up on the stage of Earth Day at Belmont Plateau in 1970. And the high point, so I'm thinking, is this guy going to tell me what kind of bicycle am I? Am I going to get some type of practical advice here? And the high point of Earth Day was him kissing this other Jew, Allen Ginsberg, on the lips. Everybody, this was a deliberate act of transgression. Now, I don't want to vouch for the chastity of 70,000 hippies there on Belmont Plateau, but I would say that homosexuality was not part of the zeitgeist. This was 1970. This was disgusting. And everybody was supposed to be open-minded, and everybody's turned off by this guy who basically, he's there to take over the movement, to take over the anti-war movement. He's an ecologist. He's a sensitive guy. He built a reputation for himself in Philadelphia as the big ecology guru, until finally people started noticing a smell coming out of his apartment. And it turns out that that smell was his girlfriend, who he chopped up and stuck in a trunk. And she was rotting at that point. And that's the story of Ira Einhorn. So with all these black ops that my generation did not understand.
Right.
We were guinea pigs in an experiment that no one explained to us.
Right. Well, yeah, I was talking to that with some friends of mine not long ago. Is I think ultimately at this point everyone's mentally ill, and basically because we've been traumatized at such a young age, and the baby boomers seems like television and these kinds of things, like there were these very direct you couldn't interact mediums for getting them to believe in things, like my dad was talking about ecology, and he said, well, I remember seeing the Detroit River catch on fire or something like that.
No,
And I
it's
was
the Cuyahoga River in Ohio.
right, yeah, and I was like, well,
Detroit River never caught on fire.
pardon me.
Cuyahoga River in Ohio.
Yeah, so point being though is his whole reason for this belief he had was something he had seen on TV one time, and that seems like what basically shaped the baby boomer generation was this very potent technology, and like my generation's more the internet, and that
Right.
has affected us crazy. But what's interesting about it is you kind of have to sort through what you're looking through, and so I found that people my age just are naturally able to reject things more easily. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyways, that's what
Oh,
we
it's
were
a
talking about.
completely different medium.
I
And
was
I was 15 years old when John F. Kennedy was murdered, and
right,
I was in school. I was in high school, getting ready to go to cross country practice. And when I went home, you turned on the TV, and Walter Cronkite said it was a lone deranged gunman, and that was it. And that was the story for what, 30 years, until people
right,
started wondering maybe that's not the real story.
right,
That's the difference. Compare that to Charlie Kirk, the murder of Charlie Kirk. And
right,
within hours, you have people saying, "Well, no, I don't think that guy shot him. What about this guy? What about that?" It's not as controllable as three TV networks was in 1963.
right. Well, and so that was so like kind of to get towards what I wanted to talk about, which is you were talking about how um it's funny you brought up bicycles, by the way. I want to say that because I happen to be reading a book by a gal, Diana Lease, out of Utah, that's writing a book. It's called Love Letters to Suburbia, but it's all about how car dependence is a big problem with society. And I noticed that, like, I can't let my children out the front door like you might have been able to when you were raising children, because everything's built where everyone's going to have three cars. But that trust and integrity are important, which is why I'd prefer to talk to you individually, and I'm happy to do that if you have the time to do that. But nobody has time and nobody has money because of usury, which is why I'm fighting usury with all my heart, with everybody I can find. And if you want to support me with your time, if you have any extra, please contact me individually. If you have to send me money to support me, that's fine. We'll find the least usurious way as possible, and you'll see a link. There are three ways that we can do this, or there are three ways that I'm working on right now. There's one bottom-up approach. I'm talking quickly for the people who don't have time. And that involves creating insular economies, which is what you will find out when you contact me individually with your extra time. That's the most important. I'm doing that locally, and I'm doing that electronically, which is where you come in. The other two are top-down. So that you can find a user, you can cause them to repent, you can tell them about Jesus Christ, and then he should fix everything. And so we won't suffer as much. Or you can pass Jubilee laws, which you don't need to find the user or do that. It makes usury illegal. It benefits everybody who is struggling, and it will punish users or anybody who commits usury. So, which is not the people you think. Nobody knows who they are. So don't worry about you being affected by that. But I'm doing the first one. I'm researching the other two, and I'm glad to hear your thoughts.
Edited by Lil Lathos.